Greetings, dear friends. Welcome to this edition of Faith and Works. My conversation partner today is a sister in Christ and a colleague in the work of the United Methodist Church, Erin Hawkins. Erin, for now more than a decade, has been the General Secretary of the United Methodist Commission on Religion and Race. And prior to being General Secretary, she was on the staff of the commission as one of the Associate General Secretaries of that commission. She's got experience working on Capitol Hill in congressional offices, and soon will be headed to take on new and different work, but all in the service of King Jesus, as she becomes the Director of Connectional Ministries for the California Pacific Annual Conference. So she's winding up here at the end of August, early September, and I wanted a chance to sort of do a macro exit interview, not as an HR person, but as someone that has worked with her, but more than that, someone like Erin who has labored as she has consistently and persistently for the church to be its better self. Welcome, Erin, and thanks for giving us 20 or 30 minutes of your time today.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you so much for this invitation.
So one of the places that I'd like to go is tell us what the Commission on Religion and Race of our denomination is. When did it get started? Has it always been? What's its work? How has that work evolved over time? I just want to kind of give you a wide canvas to paint on to help us all understand that better.
Yeah, so the General Commission on Religion and Race has been since the United Methodist Church has been in existence. We were formed at the 1968 General Conference, which was also the conference in which the United Methodist Church was born, and was really very much connected with the conversation that was happening at that time. For those who may not be aware of that story, the merger of the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Episcopal Church came with some stipulations. And one of those stipulations was that there needed to be a desegregation of the church because the Methodist Episcopal Church was segregated. There were African American churches that were in the central jurisdiction. And so the EUBs came to the table and said, if we're going to be united, it must include all of us. Well, that took took a lot of negotiation and conversation about how we might live faithfully into that reality. And there was, while integration was something that spiritually, I think many people thought was a good idea, and we could certainly see the value of ending segregation based on race, there were some practical concerns about what it would mean for African Americans and other people of color to be meaningfully included into a predominantly white church. And so that led to some hesitation, some deep conversations. And one of the results of that conversation about if we're going to do this, let's try to do it well, was the formation of the Commission on Religion and Race, who was tasked in those early days to actually monitor integration in the annual conferences, because there was concern about quality of appointment, whether Black pastors would be meaningfully included, if churches would have the resources that they needed. There were some conferences that were resistant to do any integration at all. And so in some cases, it was to push to get on with the business of ending the central, in the annual conference that was a part of the central jurisdiction and becoming a part of the jurisdictional the geographical annual conference. So that was the early work of the commission, and over time it expanded. The church has always been diverse, meaning that there have always been Native American, Hispanic, Latino people throughout the Methodist history. And over time, as we evolved as the United Methodist Church, those other voices became even more meaningfully a part of the conversation of what it meant to be the church. And the Commission on Religion and Race was the primary champion for those other voices and the primary challenger of the church to be the church, to continue to review how it lived out this segregated mindset, the worldview that would say that there is an us and a them. And I think that that's the work that we continue to do today. Today, we say that the mission of the General Commission on Religion and Race is to challenge and equip the people of the United Methodist Church to end all forms of racial discrimination and to live as God's beloved community together. And so we do that 3 particular ways. We do training and development of interculturally competent leaders, meaning leaders who can lead across all kinds of lines of difference. We champion diversity, equity, and inclusion, which looks at things systemically and helps the church, especially annual conferences in local churches, to review their practices and to become ever more faithful in being institutions that include everyone. And we host a lot of very vital conversations, is what we call them, but they're community building conversations that bring space to what are some uncomfortable places, so that we can have dialogue and can work towards shared resources and shared answers together.
Wow. That, I mean, you really have summarized 50 plus years of work. If you're going back to 68 or when it actually got rolling 69, but the legislation in 68. Thank you. That is a fabulous, comprehensive, but cogent summary. So it feels and sounds like it's moved more across time from monitoring to equipping. Is that a reasonable way to say it, or is there a better way to say it?
Well, I think that's a reasonable way to say it. And just to add that the monitoring was necessary in the earlier days of the church, because we were in the diagnostic phase, so to speak. And we really needed to get a sense of ourselves. One of the metaphors that's often used with monitoring is holding up the mirror so we can see. I've heard you talk about the pedometer and some of the other medical devices we use to help us to know our stats, the level of wellness or illness that we may be at. And so a lot of the monitoring work that has happened, and it still continues to happen to some degree, is to keep ourselves aware of how we're progressing or not. And at the same time, there comes a place in a time when you have enough information and it's time to act. And what we've learned in the work of the commission is that we would be working in partnership with annual conferences and local churches that weren't clear about what actions to take. You've given us the diagnosis. Now, what steps can we take to remediate, the situation that we find ourselves in? And so it has been in that way that we've shifted some of the emphasis of the work, not saying that those diagnostic tools are still not helpful and useful, but what we really want to do is to help people to live healthier lives, which means more holistic, more Christ-centered, more faithful, more advocacy-oriented, as we together attack this sin, this dis-ease of racism that is in our midst and that is connected to so many other of the isms that keep us from being the kingdom of God together.
Wow, that's excellent. So since we've been in another intense period around racial justice matters in this nation, and racial injustice is true all over the world and all over the United Methodist Church. But let's say since late May, George Floyd, and 8 minutes and 46 seconds with a knee on his neck by authorized police personnel, ultimately leading to his death. And just in the last 72 hours, a man apparently unarmed, from what we're able to see thus far, shot at close range, somewhere I've heard 4, I've heard 7, but at close range in the back, not even facing the police. So this conversation continues to get stirred, and the work therefore continues to need to be before us. But here's the question I want to hone in on. When we began to talk about some of this work around racial justice in our conference, we would get some messages here through the website. People leave a general email. Here's one. Well, Bishop, if you and your communication staff would stop stirring up the conversation on racism, we wouldn't have any problems. We've gotten a number of those of that tonality. That the problem is we keep talking about it, and as if meaningful, challenging, difficult, uncomfortable conversations about how to be better as persons and as a community is the cause of the ism. Occasionally I hear in the denomination, usually out of some fiscal constraints, should the work of the Commission on Religion and Race become a part of another agency, et cetera. Straight on, square in the eyes, does the United Methodist Church still need the Commission on Religion and Race?
Yes. The United Methodist Church still needs the Commission on Religion and Race. And let me reflect a little bit more on that in light of what you just said. When I first started working for the Commission in 2001, probably till around 2007 or 8-ish when I became General Secretary, the one thing that I heard almost to a letter, to a number, in every conversation that I would be involved in with race was, we're talking about this, but so much of it is under the surface. In every workshop, in every conversation, we know that racism is real, but it's so beneath the surface, beneath our awareness. People are not doing or saying things that are explicitly racist. So it's really hard to get at it, but yet we still feel the effects of it. And then, we have in the 2016s and, kind of on some world events that bring racism from beneath the surface to the forefront. And all of a sudden now we're hearing it on the news, we've got leaders who are setting policy around it and just outright saying and affirming behaviors that just 6 years prior you would not have been likely to see. So when I hear people say that naming the thing or talking about the thing is the source of the thing, it really makes me, it brings me back to this mind of, that we have had this illness, we have had this condition of racism that has been wreaking a havoc on us. But it's the wound that has been beneath the surface that we have not been willing to get to heal. And now, although painful, it is having its time of airing. The wound is being uncovered.
Wow.
And part of the talking about it, part of the focusing on it, shedding the light on it, putting the salve on it, the balms on it, is a part of the healing process that we weren't able to get to before, because we wouldn't talk about it, because we kept the wounding beneath our awareness, below the surface. It was something we didn't want to talk about. So wow. It certainly is uncomfortable, it's painful, it's traumatic, and it is the only way through the valley, of this shadow of death, so that we can come out on the other side with some healing and possibly some different ways of being together that sustain us into the future. So how do I equate that with having a Commission on Religion and Race? And I'm going to say that it's not so much the agency. This is something that I have been saying within GCORR for a long time. It isn't about the structure, although I think it's important because we need to be held accountable. There needs to be a place of accountability where the church is funneling its support adequately and focusing attention and giving authority to help move the denomination forward. This happens in the ministry. So you can put it somewhere else if you want to, but why? The question would be why? If it is financial, then what that says is that we're not willing to invest in our own healing that has plagued us from 1968 when we wondered what to do with Black folk, and we just kind of shoved a bunch of churches in annual conferences. And from that very moment, and from all the moments before that, before becoming the United Methodist Church, that have never fully been reconciled, but that plus has been building up, that racialized, that racial wound has been building up in this denomination almost from its inception, when our beloved brother John Wesley called Native American savages, till now, where we have churches that still refuse people of color and or women to be their pastors. If we're not willing to invest adequately in the healing of this church, if we're not willing to give authority, blessing, resources, attention to those things which keep us from fully being the community that God has ordained us to be, and to live our mission to make disciples and transform the world, then we're missing the mark. And so it is on that note that I say we do need to have a General Commission on Religion and Race.
All right. Well, you sort of made a case. I mean, there is a sense in which this work of anti-racism, dismantling racism, is everybody's work. And in my dream world, I would love if all of the pieces and parts of our denomination structurally had a conscious way of doing that in the places where they work. One of the things I think about having the commission, it occurs to me, is while it can be somewhat isolating and caricaturing of you and or other staff that have been there, it is, I'm hearing you say, a potential place of integrative accountability. Is that work?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so now you're leaving at the end of the month and heading home. You happen to be from Southern California, Los Angeles. You'll become the council director of the California Pacific Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. So your home conference, your hometown metropolitan area, so to speak, though the conference goes across parts of the Pacific.
That's
so
right.
Your lever as general secretary and as a staff person of a general agency has sort of been way out there. So here's the rock. I'm thinking about Archimedes here. You're pressing on the lever way out here. You're moving closer to the work of local congregations, and your job, the mission of the annual conference, is to equip local churches to carry out the mission of making disciples of Jesus Christ. And you'll be overseeing not the work, I want to say to our audience, of religion and race. That will be one thing that you're overseeing with staff colleagues. But regarding this work and how you integrate it with other roles, how do you envision equipping local communities of faith, and now that you're closer to them from a vocational standpoint and professional standpoint, to do this work of dismantling racism?
Well, I think at the heart of disciple making, and which we know that the local church is the primary place where disciples are made. I think a key to that journey, and that is a fulcrum point in local churches, is encouraging and equipping them to fall in love with their communities, with the people that are around them, the people that they serve. And, that's how they may, however they define community. And so I think that that's essential to being an anti-racist. There have been churches in my capacity as General Secretary of GCORR have said, we want to put out a Black Lives Matter sign, in front of our church. And I think that, those kinds of symbolic measures can be, helpful, an expression of your heart. And I'm always quick to say, and how many Black lives are you in relationship with as you put that out? And so, hang out the sign, but actually go out and build the relationships, meet the people, hear the truths, develop a heart for Black lives, rather than a philosophical perspective about Black lives. And so this is what I see, this is one of the dreams that I have going into this new role, is really getting a sense of how local churches are falling in love with their communities, with the people that they're around, the people that they serve, and finding ways to resource them in doing that. And that's key to the dismantling racism work, is really predicated on this relationship, the incarnational, because what makes the church distinct from doing this as like an activist group is that we're doing this because Christ first loved us. And so we're out to show this love into the world. And so that is inherently relational. And so building those relationships, encouraging folks to build those relationships, crossing lines of difference, as a way of then going on to the work of dismantling, I think is super important.
Gotcha. So when the commission began, we were sort of, in terms of the UMC, even though you pointed out a long historical continuity with a variety of racial ethnic groups in Methodism and in the EUB tradition, et cetera. But we were sort of, when we talked about race in '68, we were talking Black and white. And that's what many of us imagined. If we were Black or white, it's not necessarily what Latinx persons saw and heard, or indigenous Native American Indians saw. So what's the work of, in a diverse church, a diverse world, an increasingly diverse nation, if you happen to be in the United States, of the so-called racial ethnic minority groups? What's their work together, and how do we give helpful accent to all of the traditions that are a part of who we are?
Mm-hmm. So I think the work of centering those voices and for those communities of color to find ways to individually and collectively tell their story, share their gifts unapologetically. One of the things that I hear so often is about how the spirituality of our communities of color are a gift to the church. And I often wonder, why aren't they the gift of the church? It's almost like they're outside offering the gift to United Methodism, of our spirituality, of our cultures, but we're just as United Methodist as anyone else. And so once again, it shows that there is an experience that is at the center that is not reflective of racial and ethnic diversity. And so that recentering of bringing those voices and that experience more to the center of our identity of a church, rather than the lovely, beautiful expressions of parts of the church. Mm-hmm. And so I really think that that's important work that communities of color need to, to find. We've got to find our way closer to the center while also connecting to those margins, because I think another thing that we must do, whatever we do as the Black church, should be in response to the realities of Black communities. The same for Hispanic, those connections to those people, because the church exists for the people who are outside of the church, and we're connected to those places that are most marginalized, that are most, that could be the most suffering. And so helping the church to have a pathway to that is so important. But as there's a centering of the mission field, because the mission field looks like more of the folks that are on the margins than they do more of the folks that are in the pews of the United Methodist Church. Part of the work needs to be, how do we shift that picture so that the people in the pews are also reflective of the people in the mission field. And so decentering our current ways of doing, which are all centered, quite frankly, on whiteness, and those ways of seeing and being in the world, and centering more the voices that are also part of the church, but that are Black and brown and Asian and Pacific Islander and non-English speaking and non-dominant, and all of the ways that you could possibly name, I think is essential work for us to do.
Great. Well, listen, one more question, and then I'm going to give a little commercial about some other work that's happening with dismantling racism. The question is, we're headed to Minneapolis, presumably at some point right about a year from now. We're, postponed general conference, et cetera. And we're going to a city where that has been a focal point, though the focal points seem to keep popping up in a number of places. I mentioned Kenosha, Wisconsin, just this week. But assuming the general conference will be in Minneapolis as it's scheduled for late August, early September of 2021, who, as a United Methodist Church, what might we do, and I want to say symbolically, legislatively, and structurally, to strike the right chord around the work of anti-racism? Is there anything that our presence there and the work of the General Conference can and ought to do, in your opinion?
Well, I think that the work of the General Conference definitely, I'm going to focus on the kind of the structurally and legislatively piece.
Okay.
Because I think that there will be some good things that happen there symbolically. I've not known the church to not do well symbolically. So, with worship, and although I don't think that's just a symbol, that's a real act. But what I would say legislatively and structurally is to look at those places systemically where racism still continues to drive our life together, and think about new ways of doing it. As we know that many of the systems of the United Methodist Church aren't sustainable. There are going to be deep conversations about the financial realities of the church. We know money is a place where our values, and particularly our racist values, can get lived out. So I would hope that there is some conversation about that is anti-racist in nature, that works alongside our interrogation of the budget and the setting of budget priorities. Mm-hmm. I would like for us to, as we think about the new social principles and what that means for the denomination, to be thinking particularly about whether or not the statements that we make around racism are strong enough and actually provide enough guidance and inspiration to United Methodists to be active in the world on those areas. If we are looking at any legislation that deals with ordination, or any of the major systems that govern our church, that there would be 3 or 4 questions that we're primed to ask, mm-hmm. That would allow us to look at it through anti-racist lens, so that we are shifting the denomination in the direction of greater equity and freedom for all people. And then, of course, we know that there has been a protocol that was expected to be discussed at the last General Conference. It may come up again, or some version of it will come up again. And I think that those conversations, as we begin to think about what the future of the church is, does it take us closer to the mission field that we often miss as the United Methodist Church, or not? And whatever agreements get made should not be on the backs of those who we need to most encourage, encircle, and reach, in order for the denomination to be fruitful and faithful. So if we're balancing budgets, to say it more pointedly, if we're balancing budgets and making, separation agreements and changing rules and laws on the backs of people of color and of women, so that the sacrifices that they've already made in this denomination are increased in order to preserve or protect our comfort level with the status quo, then we will have missed the mark. So I'm hoping that there are some opportunities for us to really bring this anti-racist lens into focus as we think about our future as a denomination.
Wow, that's fabulous. So, dear friends, thanks for joining Erin and I today. I want to say that Erin has been a part of helping the church, particularly in the current resurgence of the virus of racism, to do new and different work. She's been assisting the Council of Bishops, working with other general secretaries and agencies. And one of the things in this initiative that you've seen both on our conference website and at umc.org is around dismantling racism. A slice of that is that Erin has helped to shape and has been and will continue to be the moderator for a series of town halls on a variety of discussions that walk around the conversation of dismantling racism. So I hope all of you in West Ohio will pay attention to those town halls. They, when they air, they are done live, but then they are posted by UMCOM within a very reasonable period of time after that. And there's several upcoming that I hope you'll pay attention to and turn to the website to find out where you can locate them. Erin, as you move, as you physically move, because I need prayer when I move physically, just the physicality of moving, but as you move into a new role and as you leave Washington, D.C., after more than 20 years of that being your primary locus of operation, albeit in multiple jobs and roles, please know of my and our prayers for you and our confidence that you'll be a great blessing, not only to the Cal Pacific Conference, to Bishop Hagia and the staff colleagues, but that you'll continue to pour in to the United Methodist Church, your leadership and your wisdom. God bless you and God keep you is our prayer.
Thank you.